Well, welcome everyone to another webinar of History's Calling, Where Will It Take You? Joining us today is Virginia McAlister, who is the Senior Genealogist Research Manager at Ancestry ProGenealogists. Welcome.
Thank you.
So just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website at history.byu.edu. Following Virginia's comments, we will open up for a Q&A, so please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we will cover them in the order that they are received. Our next webinar is Thursday, April 1st, where we will hear from Alan Barnett at the Utah Division of Archives and Records. Well, Virginia, thank you so much again for being here. We're hoping that we could start the conversation with you telling us a little bit about yourself and your current role.
All right. Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I am a BYU alum and I love any opportunity to interact with students again, so I'm very excited to be here. I'm Virginia McAlister. I know the little bio was there, before he logged in, but I live here in Orem, Utah. With my husband and 3 of my 4 kids. One is off at school. And I am an accredited genealogist in the US Mid-South. I think it's now called the Upper South. They redid the names a little bit since I got my accreditation, but that's through ICAP-Gen. And as she said, I work for Ancestry ProGenealogists, which is a division of Ancestry.com. It's the client services division where we offer professional genealogy services as well as travel and publication offerings, and I am a research manager there.
Thank you so much for that. We're so excited to hear. We have a lot of family history students that are joining us today, so very grateful.
Awesome.
So, Virginia, can you tell us a little bit about your story? How did you get to where you are? Was that linear for you?
Not at all. So it's definitely much more of a winding path up the mountain than a direct shot. I grew up in Virginia. Both of my parents are historians. They worked for the Joseph Smith Papers Project as editors. So I grew up with history and I grew up surrounded by history. And so I think that really sparked my love of history from a really young age, like probably 3rd or 4th grade. I just fell in love with history. And when I came to BYU, I kind of bounced around through different majors, as a lot of people do as a freshman, and eventually ended up in a Roman history class. And I had taken Latin for years during junior high and high school and just fell in love with it and said, okay, this is going to be my major. I majored in classical civilizations with a Latin literature and Roman history degree. Not terribly useful when it comes to any sort of career, unless you're going to stick around in academics. And so I decided to continue and do a master's degree. Did my master's degree, stayed in humanities, and kind of focused a little bit later in medieval and Renaissance studies. Again, not terribly useful for most, traditional occupations. But while I was a master's student, I was able to teach a couple courses. And when I graduated, they asked me to stay on and continue teaching, just in an instructor part-time role. I had 2 children during my graduate studies and had 2 more children afterwards. So that kept me pretty busy, kind of in a full-time role, and then did part-time teaching. But after probably about 9 or 10 years, my oldest kids were going to school all day and I was teaching primarily in the evenings and wasn't really feeling like I got a ton of time with them, and was just feeling kind of pulled in another direction. I'd always loved genealogy since it was just a natural extension of history, I think, for me. And I started just kind of learning about it more formally. I really hadn't, I think I took a family history class for 1 week while at BYU and dropped it and switched to something else So I didn't really have any formal education in it, but I loved it. Just kind of doing it personally and for friends. So I took some courses through the National Genealogical Society. I read books and publications and attended conferences and started taking just kind of some private clients, usually friends of friends, basically, that were interested in their own family history. And then attended a conference, actually at BYU. It was a 2-day conference, and there were 2 lunches. And those 2 lunches changed my life. One, I met the man who would actually become my mentor when I eventually joined Progen. He was a nationally renowned genealogist, and he really encouraged me to pursue accreditation in Southern research. And then the other was just a gentleman I was sitting next to at lunch, and we spoke just about our love of genealogy. And at the end of it, he handed me his card and said, I'd like to have you do contract work for my company, which was Legacy Tree Genealogy. And so that's when I kind of entered a more professional realm of genealogy, I guess. Worked for them for a few years as a contract researcher, and then joined their management team as an editor. And then during that time, got my accreditation and kind of specialized in Southern research. And then I was actually going through a divorce and had 4 kids and needed something that would kind of give me more stability and give me insurance and, you know, all of those types of things that you need to help support a family. And so Progen was hiring at that point. And I applied there. I had always heard wonderful things about working for Ancestry. My sister had worked for them in their customer service department and really loved it, and knew they had great benefits. And so I applied, and they brought me on, and I've been there now for almost 7 years.
It's amazing. I'm hearing your story, and I'm hearing so many things about your journey. I'm hearing that you had some incredible opportunities to build your career capital in ways that you didn't probably at the time know that you were doing. You know, your fascination with history, where you came from, your family's fascination, and then kind of taking some courses here and there, and then networking and just talking with people and opening your mouth and asking the right questions. It just seems like, you know, exactly what we try to tell our students to do all the time, but you're just the living proof of exactly what we're hoping our students will understand, that there's not one path to get to the kind of position that you got to. You built up a lot of things along this journey. You asked, you know, all the right questions at the right time, and timing was such an influencer in that. You know, I just think that that's beautiful and amazing. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
So let's jump into your role a little bit. What does the day and the life look like for a senior research manager?
Hectic, especially right now with, you know, kids running around and trying to juggle kind of. I was already actually working from home primarily before the pandemic hit, but I didn't have them home all day, you know, trying to do school from home and things like that too. So that's been fun. But so basically, for our type of company, the easiest equivalent I give a lot of people to it is to think of lawyers. Our customers come to us and they pay a retainer to retain our services, to help out, to either build their family tree, or to just help break through a brick wall on one line, or all sorts of different, you know, requests. And so we have them give us a retainer up front, and then we bill our time to that. So, you know, we're working in billable hours, which is not something when you're in college, most people are going to be familiar with or thinking about. But so basically most of my day is working those billable hours, because that's what generates revenue for our company, is when we bill time to our session. It's in 6-minute increments. Then we are able to recognize that revenue as a company. And so they really encourage, and they give us billable hour targets, similar to, you know, if anyone has knows anyone who's a lawyer, that they're always working towards their billable hour targets, and that's what generates the revenue. So it's the same thing for me. But as a research manager, I'm really responsible for overseeing the client's project. And so when they come in the door, we have a sales team who makes the initial sale, and then the projects are assigned to research managers based on our expertise. And then at that point, we take over the project and we're responsible for overseeing it from beginning to end. So we're talking to the clients, we're trying to understand what their goals are, and then we're making sure that the research happens in an efficient manner according to genealogical standards. In some cases, I'm the lead researcher as well, because the project just falls under my area of expertise. In other cases, I have a team of researchers that I work with, and so I'm assigning sessions to them, and I'm helping, just kind of oversee that updates are happening. If the clients have questions, we're getting those answered. And then when the project comes in, I'm still responsible for, reviewing the project, making sure it's clean and it's ready to go out to the client. So in a given day, I typically have about 50 to 70 clients at a time. So in a given day, I'm usually touching anywhere from just 2 to 3 sessions if I'm doing a lot of research work, to 12 to 15 sessions in a day if I'm answering a lot of client questions or reviewing updates and getting those out the door and things like that. So every day is different in terms of exactly what it looks like, but it's the bulk of my time is going to be just, overseeing these projects and making sure that they're moving, and again, kind of troubleshooting when there's issues, things like that. There is some, what we would call non-billable time in our workday for things like company meetings. We are at Ancestry, it's a corporation, so there's just a level of, meetings, trainings, things like that we have to attend. We're also really lucky at Progen. We have so many experts in different fields, so we're constantly invited to trainings where, one of my colleagues will be doing a training on a certain topic, or we'll bring in experts from around the country to, just speak on whatever they specialize in. So that's kind of our non-billable time that we spend each day, but the bulk of the time is going to be on the client work.
So I think it's fascinating because I think that administratively speaking, you hear manager and you think, oh, I'm just overseeing, but it sounds to me, from what I understand, you still have opportunities to connect with clients and to work to help troubleshoot certain items that might be stuck. So you still have a little bit of that responsibility, as well as these kind of more administrative duties to kind of help the team.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I love research. I mean, that's just kind of what drives me. And so if I was completely, and in fact, I was in a role for a little while that was probably 80% administrative, 20% research. I did not like managing people on that level, and stepped away from that because I was like, I need to be more involved in the research. And so now I'm probably kind of 50% of my time is still doing research, and that's my choice. It's the way that I've decided to, work my role. And then 50% of the time is just sort of managing these sessions and communicating with clients, but others are doing the bulk of the research on them.
I'm sure that's so good for some of our students to hear, because we have some research lovers amongst us. So I'm really glad to hear that you were able to design this role in a way, and that it's been designed in a way that you've been able to adapt to both of those worlds. That's really great.
Yeah.
So I assume, just some assumptions, having been a manager, you had to probably possess some skills in business, right? In administrative things. What skills are necessary for the work that you do?
So many. And I'm also thinking, towards the students too that are here and listening, and what types of skills, like going back in time, can I think were really critical for me as a student that I was able to then take into my career. I would say the number one is writing skills. and communication skills. And really for me, that developed as in my master's program. That's where I really got that kind of deeper feedback from, my thesis chair and my thesis committee. And I was lucky to have a couple of professors that I just worked with regularly, and they were really invested in me and helping me develop those skills. And so that one was absolutely critical, and I use it all day, every day. So writing skills is really, really important. So develop those as much as you can, and just get as much experience as you can in those. Also, time management is huge, obviously, for a role like this and where you're on the clock, and billing time to client sessions. You want to feel like you're using that time effectively and that you're giving them value. We're not selling a specific outcome. We can never promise, oh, we're going to get you back to your immigrant ancestor, or we're going to build out every line on your tree 5 generations. We can't promise things like that. We're selling our time and our expertise. And so time management is huge in that situation, where you've got to be able to work through your day effectively, or if you want to bill 5 or 6 hours in the day, if you can't manage your time well, you're going to end up working 10 or 12 hours during the day just to get those 5 or 6 hours of billable time out the door. So yeah, you got to be able to manage your time, and also learn to cap yourself, and say, I can't do any more on this project. I don't have the answer yet, but this is the time I had to work in, and I have to stop here, and I think as students that can be, you don't necessarily feel that pressure. You're not given a time limit on how much time you can spend on a paper, except that you only have 24 hours in a day, and that's kind of your time limit. But learning to just say, okay, I have 1 hour, I'm just going to work. I'm not going to take breaks. I'm not going to be distracted by text or email. I just need to work straight through for this amount of time, so learning to be able to do that is really critical.
Like intentional productivity, right?
Yep. Yes.
Good. Okay.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned a little bit earlier, before you had the opportunity to go to a lunch and network, that you would take on personal clients. I know that when I talk with other recruiters at family history organizations, one of the things that they say is you need to step outside your own family, right? If this is going to be a legitimate practice, you need to step outside your own family and really take on different projects. We want you to have at least, 3 to 4 outside of family kind of projects. Can you lead us through maybe that experiential learning and how that kind of fits into the qualifications to go into this kind of field?
Yeah, I mean, really, so much of genealogy just comes by doing. I mean, there's no substitute for the actual experience of working through a project, working through a problem and figuring out how to solve it. I mean, really, so much of genealogy is problem solving. And that'll be one of my screening questions for a lot of hires is, do you like doing puzzles that's all sky and, or that you have no picture for, or, things like that, because you're problem solving, right? But until you actually have the experience of trying to do it, you just don't know what you don't know yet, and how to work through that. And so, yeah, you really do, in your own family, if they're all New England and you've never experienced doing Southern research, and suddenly you're asked by a client to do Southern research, or you're asked by your company to do that, you're in a really different area, or in a really different way of approaching a problem. And so it's great to eventually get some expertise in a specific area, but you really need that kind of general experience of doing lots of different projects in lots of different areas of the country or even the world. It's just going to build that base of being able to problem solve for various areas. So yeah, getting experience, and like I said, I mean, I just asked friends, hey, do you have something on your tree that I can help work on, and that was the way I got experience. Or I try to take opportunities to actually go and do hands-on research in a courthouse to learn what was actually there and what those records are actually like. I mean, anything like that that just gives you that kind of hands-on experience is worth, you know, hours of sitting in a classroom having it explained to you. You know,
Right.
it's just, yeah, there's nothing like actually going and doing.
Right. And the value, we were talking with Virginia prior to this webinar about the value of the internship that's required for our family history students and how that gives you exposure to a lot of those things. But even doing them outside of an internship is what I'm hearing too, would be advised. So
yeah. Yeah, because as we mentioned, I know there's not a ton of internships out there in like traditional family history companies. You know, there's kind of family search. Sometimes Ancestry has done them, sometimes we haven't, you know, and specifically a Progen. So that experience, I think, can be hard to gain if there's not a lot of opportunities out there, but just being a self-starter and, you know, kind of saying, okay, if I can't get it through a traditional, you know, internship or a traditional job, can I just get that experience somewhere, you know, helping someone out, helping out in a ward in family history calling or in a library or some, you know, just kind of anything you can do to really give yourself those opportunities to have experiences.
I have a lot of students that come and ask me about if I were to ramp up my education, right? Because family history only takes up so many credits here at BYU before, you know, minors are considered or language or something like that. Are there any suggestions? I know you mentioned writing and communication and anything that will give you access to problem solving. Was there anything else that you would recommend for students to kind of add to their tool belt that they have access to as students?
Yeah, so definitely English courses, writing, you know, things that are outside of just doing family history, but things that are going to polish those writing skills or just give you the opportunity to receive a lot of feedback on your writing. I mean, that's huge and critical. So anything you can do like that. Just general history courses. I find I am constantly just learning more about the history of the areas that I specialize in. So the bulk of the projects that I get are kind of colonial Virginia. I work with a researcher who actually lives in Virginia. And so together we take all the Virginia cases. And then a lot of others are just general Southern. But I'm constantly reading history books and just things because it puts what we're doing in context and it helps provide clues about, okay, what were the migration routes through these areas? You know, so anything that just helps you get greater experience in areas that you're interested in terms of general history is going to give you a huge leg up. Beyond that, I would say for family history right now, DNA is everything. It's in 90 to 95% of the projects that I do involve DNA, either Y-DNA or autosomal DNA, occasionally mitochondrial, but very little. So anything you can also do to just become familiar with genetics, with DNA. So that's kind of off the beaten path. Most people would think more liberal arts, you know, but if you can branch out into the sciences just a little bit, you know, then that will also give you a big leg up on just being able to utilize DNA effectively in family history.
Did you have to learn all of that on the job, or did you take courses to familiarize yourself with that very growing part of the industry?
Yeah. For the most part, it's been on the job. I'm actually really lucky right now. The team that I'm on is actually the unknown parentage team. And so it's an entire team in our division that's dedicated to helping people figure out who their parents or their grandparents are. I'm not specializing in that. I just happen to end up on that team, but I do a lot of like kind of 1800s brick wall research that's involving DNA, where they might not know who their great grandparent is, or there was a change in identity, and we're trying to figure out the original identity and the parents of this person and things like that. So it's kind of been through osmosis that I've been able to learn a lot of that by being on the unknown parentage team. Angie Bush, anyone who knows genetic genealogy will be familiar with Angie Bush. She's on that team. So I've been able to learn a lot from her. And a lot of it has just been attending trainings in-house because it's so huge for us. We want all the genealogists at Progen to understand how to utilize DNA. So there's been a lot of in-house trainings, both kind of formal and informal, on how to do that. But again, most of it has just been experience. It's just been, okay, I got DNA, I got to figure out, can I use this to help break through this brick wall? And I'm learning how to cluster, and I'm learning how to triangulate, and I'm learning how to use different types of DNA tests all at the same time. And it's just been a learning process of actually doing it.
Do you feel like job descriptions in the future will integrate, you have to have this in order to be here? Do you feel like it's headed in that direction, or do you feel like this is just such a growing and unique situation, we will always train you from within on this?
It will depend. I think at this point, it's definitely a benefit to at least have some understanding. You don't have to have like an expertise, but to at least have an understanding of the basics of what's the difference between Y DNA, mitochondrial, autosomal, like, do you at least understand what the difference is between them, and the basics of how they might be used. For a lot of people coming into the field, I think the expectation will remain that it's something that you'll learn as you go. And you probably won't be expected to be an expert in it right off the bat. But just know going in, that is going to be a part of the field, for the future, that's going to be a part of the field. And so there is that kind of genetic component that's different from a traditional research, but it's still problem solving. It's just kind of approaching the problem solving with a slightly different tool and in a slightly different way. But it's still, for me, like we use Lucid charts to map out our DNA matches, and it's still basically like putting a puzzle together, where you're laying them all out and you're trying to figure out how they fit all together. So it's still a similar process.
Oh, that's so good to hear. I'm sure a lot of our family history students are like, whew, okay, good. I'm
don't have to be
okay.
an expert yet. But and really the biggest, I'd recommend like do a DNA test yourself, or have some of your family members test and just play around with the results, see what you can figure out. Like I just broke through a new line on my dad's side because of DNA. Just like a couple months ago, actually.
That's amazing. That's exciting.
Just take a task, play around with it, and that'll really give you some experience in it.
Thank you for that. So just to kind of wrap up here, what are some other things that our graduates pursuing a career in genealogy need to expect in the field, either within the industry or specifically at Progen, that they might not know right now?
Yeah, I think one of the things is expect, if you're just graduating, that your learning curve is going to continue for a while. Well, and really, it's going to continue forever. None of us are ever going to be at a point where we know everything there is to know about genealogy and record sets, but especially for the first few years coming out of school, that learning curve is going to be probably really steep and really fast. For a lot of people, there's still going to be a lot to learn. But that's when you're going to get that experience, right? Is coming out of school and you're actually going to start working in projects. If you come to Progen as a new student, you would come in on what we call the assistant level. And so, some of the stuff you'd be doing is just setting up trees, helping to create citations, create image documents, clean up trees, things like that. And then with that would come kind of very guided chunks of research. You would not just be handed a project and be told, okay, you've got 20 hours, go. That's not going to be the experience you would have. You're going to be working with a research manager, with a mentor, to kind of direct the research, small chunks at a time, review it, you know, things like that. So sometimes we have people coming in thinking they're just going to be doing a project from beginning to end, and that's not, you know, that's not the case. We want you to skill build, you know, with us for the first few years. For those going, you know, who do want to just start taking on clients, you know, then it's going to be a different experience. They'll be doing projects from beginning to end, but then you have to figure out, you know, what's the value of that? What experience level do I have? So I definitely recommend, even in those situations, get someone who's already in that field, who's already has their own business, you know, get some sort of mentor to help them learn to work through that. Because then you're also responsible for marketing and sales and accounting and IT and all of those, you know, those types of considerations that you might not be thinking about when you're in school and you're, you know, just kind of first taking on your first few clients. There's a lot to building a business if you're going to try to do it on your own. But I've done it both ways, and you know, and there's also just contractor work where you're working as a contractor for various companies. We have lots of contractors at Progen, but again, you know, kind of the value of your, you know, your hourly rate is going to depend on your expertise and your experience level. So that can be a hard thing to judge sometimes.
So this is a little off script, but I thought since we have you, I'm curious about how you set your value as a consultant, right? A lot of people go into it saying, well, how much should I charge? And what does this look like? And, you know, with the time management piece, how did you determine what that looked like for you?
Yeah, that one is definitely tough. Obviously, experience is going to be a big factor. The more experienced you are, you know, then the more you're going to be willing to charge. I think also that how in demand is the area that you specialize in. That's huge. Like Southern is always in demand. I mean, we are swamped with Southern cases at Progen always. So there's certain areas that are really in demand. Unknown parentage is always in demand. There's just is. But then, you know, some things like French research, not high in demand, you know, for whatever reason, we just don't get a lot of those cases. Or Western, kind of Western US, you know, also we don't get a ton of those. So just kind of figuring out, I mean, go with what you're passionate about, right? You know, go with what you love. Like I tried a lot of different types of cases and just love doing Southern research, whether that's because I'm from there, I don't know, but I loved it. And I was passionate about it. And so that's what I did. And it just happened to be an in-demand field. Go with whatever you're passionate about, but just know if you're in a field that's not as much in demand, then you probably aren't going to get away with charging as much for it because it's just kind of that supply and demand. I mean, it's just economics. So that's also a good thing to consider is your area of expertise. And if you have language skills, that's going to be valuable too. If you have strong DNA skill, you know, so there's things beyond your area of specialty that you can do to make yourself more valuable. You know, having a language skill, having the DNA or something, having access to a repository that's really valuable. If you're in DC and you've got access to all the repositories in DC, that makes you pretty valuable. So, you know, there's a lot of different considerations to think about.
Thanks for talking about that. I know I get that question a lot from my students, so I appreciate it. Well, I thank you so much. I feel really enlightened here. I'd love to open this up for any questions that we have. So I think that we'll get Arnie back on to help us navigate the Q&A.
Well, here I am.
Here you are.
Here I am. We have a couple of questions so far. I see if there's some more coming in. Carly Twiner has asked, what is the research process that you go through for projects? Like what records do you usually go to and how deep into the research do you typically go?
That's a good question. And, definitely something that will obviously depend on the type of project it is. I would say, just like if we have a typical project, one of our typical projects that we get a lot, especially with Colonial Virginia, is maybe they've been able to go back, usually to kind of the early 1800s on their own, and they're stuck, right? And they don't know how to go back further, and they'd love to get back towards the immigrant ancestor and even know where did they come from, right? People always like to know what's the place of origin of the immigrants and things like that. So, for that type of project, you're outside of, informative census records, you're outside of vital records, so you're really in the county level records. So that's where I spend most of my days, are in county level records, so things like wills, probates, deeds, court records, tax records, very rarely in newspapers or church records. But if you're in, a different area, so maybe New England, you might be in those more. So that's again where the area of expertise will play into what type of record. But most of my time is spent in kind of county level courthouse records. And obviously you have a lot of burn counties in the South, so you have to know how to work around record loss. A lot of military records, we definitely use those quite a bit because those help us, kind of overcome the loss of county level records. And this is also where DNA can come into play, to help try to overcome those types of challenges. So for me, but in terms of how deep we go, that'll depend on like how much retainer we have. If it's so our sessions start at 20 hours. I very rarely get those. I think they actually are not allowed to sell a Southern session for just 20 hours because it's a miserable experience. And so typically our sessions are anywhere from 30 hours to start to, I've had ones that are $10,000 sessions, where we've got a good 80 plus hours to start. And so in terms of how deep, it will depend on the retainer I've got to work with. But a lot of our clients also renew. And so we're able to kind of continue and go deeper if, obviously if we have more time.
Regina, you have just really a fun job. I got it.
It is fun.
Oh my goodness, how fun is that? Oh, well, that was a good answer. Here's another question that we have. Meredith has asked, does unknown parentage stem more from when they cannot extend a line back further due to not knowing lines, or due to adoption?
So when we use the term unknown parentage, it's typically referring to adoption cases, or whether there was a formal or informal adoption, or just situations where they either don't know one of their biological parents or grandparents. So typically when we're saying unknown parentage, that's what at least we, within our company are referring to, is it's within those first two generations beyond the client, that one of them is just not known. Now, we certainly have lots of cases where, like I said, it's like the great grandparent or a little further back. In some situations, that it's not an adoption, it's just that they're not known to the family, right? That they just never passed down that name, or they've never been able to identify them in a record. There may not have been an adoption, it's just unknown. But when we use the term unknown parentage, it's usually a pretty specific term being used for the first two generations.
Yeah, that's interesting. Cassandra Holland asks, do you travel for research, or do you have connections where you reach out to other researchers to get to those sources?
So typically, like other than doing personal research, I'm typically not going to be traveling for research. I have traveled to do, like, Who Do You Think You Are? We do the research for the TV show. And then sometimes some of us are invited to be on the episodes as kind of a guest genealogist. So I've been able to travel as part of that. But typically we've got contractors in most of kind of the major cities or near major repositories that we might need. As I mentioned, like specifically on my team, because I do all of the colonial Virginia research, I have a researcher on my team who's in Virginia. So she can go to the Library of Virginia. She can go to the courthouses and things like that. We also have, we have offices in Dublin, in London. So, we've got researchers and then throughout Europe. So we've got researchers who are employees kind of dotted throughout, and then we have a whole network of contractors in, near most of the major cities or repositories we might need access to.
I think this is that was a good answer. Thank you so much. I think this one relates to that one. And this is Bruce Holmes asked, do you do genealogy work outside the US and Europe? Is it more rare to work with genealogy in regions outside these, such as Japan?
So yes, we definitely do quite a bit of research. We have a couple of, like I said, we have a team based in Dublin. We have a team based in London. We have a couple of researchers in Germany. We have an extensive contractor network in Italy. Those are kind of the countries we do the most work in, probably outside the US. We have researchers who specialize in all over Latin America. Asia is the most difficult. There's not a lot of records that we have available to us throughout a lot of areas of Asia. So that's probably the most difficult area to work in. But we do have, we have one researcher who is fluent in Japanese and knows how to do research there. And I believe we have a couple of contractors there who can help out. So we definitely do international research quite a bit.
Can I just jump in here, Virginia? I've heard that, in Asia, because they keep all their records in books, really the need there is just records management. And that's what I've heard. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've heard that as well. I mean, it's obviously way outside my area of expertise. I mean, I think that tradition is especially strong in China. There's a lot of other areas though that don't have a strong tradition of record keeping, at least written record. And so that's obviously a challenge. But our new CEO for Ancestry is Asian American, and she has a real interest in branching out in general as in Ancestry into Asia and gathering more records out of Asia that are available, going in and seeing if we can, get microfilms of those books of genealogies and learn how we could incorporate those onto the Ancestry website and things like that. So I think it's a direction that will become much bigger in the future. A lot of companies are kind of looking at that as sort of the next wave. So it's definitely going to be something we'll be keeping an eye on in the future.
So exciting.
Yeah.
Especially as data continues to open up and to be available. I can see this really blooming. Byron Jesperson has the question, does Progen have part-time employees, or would that be a contractor type position?
We have very few, usually just kind of for very specific circumstances. For the most part, it's full-time employees. And otherwise, it would be traditionally a contractor situation.
So full-time employees or contractors, but not any part-time.
Yeah, very, very few part-time and just for very specific situations.
Well, that's nice to understand there. Meredith Kenny says, is there much demand for Portuguese genealogists?
Not that I'm aware. Well, actually, yeah, it totally depends. We certainly do have some sessions that are either like Portugal, the Azores, or Brazil. But again, a lot of it is going to depend on record availability for the areas. And in some areas, there's just not a lot of records, in those areas that we can work with. And so even though someone might have the language skill, like the Portuguese language skills, you're still going to be limited by the record availability. So that, that's kind of the easiest way to answer that.
Yeah, that's, we've really been hitting you pretty rapid fire on these things. Good job, Virginia. Here's another one. Carly asks, what expertise do you need to work from one of the international repositories?
To work with one of the international repositories or work from one of the international offices?
What she says is work from one of the international repositories. So I would guess that would be working in that repository. I don't know.
Well, I'll answer it both ways, I guess. So we have the international offices where you would be working with a lot, so like in Dublin, there's a lot of repositories right there. In London, there's a lot of repositories that you would use for British Isles research. To work out of one of those offices, then yeah, you would definitely have to have an expertise in British Isles research, whether it's Irish, Scottish, or English. And then in terms of working out of an international repository, I don't know a lot about. I mean, we have some researchers and contractors who will go in and out of. So like in Italy, everything's church based. I mean, there's some civil records offices, but a lot of it's church based. And so it's people who are, in that region of Italy, and they're really familiar with the jurisdictional issues of, okay, where would, they married maybe in this town, where would those records be kept? Are they in the local parish? Are they in the diocese? So there are people who are going to be familiar with that area and where things are going to be kept.
Great. This kind of follows the same line as the previous question. Is there good demand for Scandinavian research?
We do some, but I know there's also quite a bit of that available online. And they seem to be pretty easy to work through, so we don't get a ton of Scandinavian cases because I think a lot of people kind of figure out how to do it themselves because there's so much available online, and it's not super difficult. Like there's good census records and things like that, that will allow people to kind of figure out how to take the line back. But we do have, I know, a couple of RMs and a couple of researchers who specialize in Scandinavian. So we certainly do get cases, and enough that we're able to keep some people busy doing that.
Yeah, my wife is into Norwegian genealogical research, and there's a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, that's just always what I've heard, is there's so much out there already online that a lot of people just end up doing it themselves.
Here's one from Marissa asks, do you have suggestions on African-American genealogy, and what barriers might you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's definitely one of my areas of interest and expertise. All of the Who Do You Think You Are episodes that I've done have been African-American. It's just an area that I'm really passionate about. It's a kind of a natural extension of doing Southern research. In terms of doing African-American, the first several generations are going to be, you're using the same resources you're using for anyone, it's vital records, it's census records. But 1870 is always going to be your barrier because that's the first census after emancipation. So everything previous to that is going to be trying to identify slaveholders. And it's unfortunate, but it's just the reality, and know that it's an amazingly rewarding area to work in. It's also an incredibly painful area to work in, and to learn about their experiences and to take clients through that. But I often find that they are so appreciative because they know typically so little about their families. Those clients typically come in with maybe the names of their parents and grandparents, and that's all they know. They know nothing beyond that. And occasionally there are freed lines previous to emancipation, but for so many, once you hit that Civil War era, then you're working entirely in trying to figure out who their slaveholders is or who their slaveholders are. So getting experience and learning how to identify slaveholders is everything for African-American researchers or anyone who wants to be an African-American researcher. that would take way more time than we have here, but there's a lot of good resources out there and strategies for learning how to do that. And if that's an area you're interested in, then that's definitely, you know, what you're going to want to work through. DNA is becoming more important for African American, especially just helping to get back to, usually it's about 4 to 5 generations back when you're going to hit slavery. And then it can be important in identifying who the slaveholders were too, because typically you'll see African Americans with at least about 25% Caucasian ethnicity in their DNA. So, you know, you're also at some point going to be working in Caucasian research as well. But the key is, can you identify where those connecting points are? And typically it's going to be through slaveholding families. So it's complex once you get back to slavery, but there's definitely some specific strategies you can learn to be able to do it effectively.
Wow, you can see why it could be incredibly painful and emotionally draining to do that kind of research.
It is, but like I said, it's really just, for me, the most rewarding cases I probably work on, because they typically, the clients come out of it so grateful for anything they can learn, because so much of it is new to them. And in fact, I just had a call with one the other day. She doesn't know who her father is. She doesn't know her paternal side at all. And she said, you know, I feel like, she put it, I'm missing some of my power by not knowing these things. And so by learning about their family, they feel more empowered personally to kind of take on whatever life throws at them. So it's really, really rewarding to work in those types of fields.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Kathleen Norris asks, what made you choose to pursue an AG over a BCG? Or Progen is one preferred since you do area-specific work.
Yeah, for me, it just was a natural extension of, you know, the fact that I was just kind of gravitating towards Southern research. And so for those who don't know AG or accredited genealogists, it's through ICAPGen, and it is region specific. Although now they are branching out into some areas of specialty like African American that might not just be Southern specific, but it is region specific. So your CG or credential genealogist is through the Board of Certified Genealogists. And that one is more about methodology and methodological approaches. We do have genealogists who have done both CGs and AGs at Progen. I thought about doing the CG. For me, it's just more about time and having the time to put together the portfolio and go through the testing process. I already did that once with an AG, so I haven't found the time yet to do it for a CG. But I think I could probably get through it at this point, just from an expertise level. But for me, it was just about, I was already acquiring the number of hours that I would need for an AG, just through the contractor work that I was doing at Legacy Tree, and, specializing in that region. And so it was just kind of a natural extension of that. But we have lots of genealogists who are AGs and CGs and some that are both. I don't know that we have a huge preference at Progen. We do offer some study groups that are more specific to AG at Progen, just because so much of what we do is regionally specific, like our pods, which is our RMs and the researchers we work with, and our teams are more regional specific. So I think it just lends itself more towards the AG. But we do encourage both, and actually we will pay all testing fees and give a reward once you receive, I think it's a $1,000 bonus once you receive your AG or your CG. So we definitely encourage them at Progen, and they're seen as something very beneficial.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What a great opportunity.
I have one more question. Do you know what the typical starting salary would be for someone right out of college? This is pretty accurate for
honestly, I don't. I started there as an RM. And so, like I said, for the ones coming out of college, it would be on the assistant level. I will say, and this is a question I get, it's kind of like, can you make a living doing genealogy? Can you support a family doing genealogy? I can attest that you absolutely can. I'm remarried, but if I wasn't, I could support my kids and my family just on my salary. I make plenty and the benefits are amazing. And, there's 401k matching and dental and, everything that if you're working on your own, that's going to seem like Shangri-La because you won't have anyone providing those things. You won't have paid time off. Things like that. Like I'm going to take this weekend off and go see my daughter and, it's just paid time off. So yeah, the starting salary, like I said, I'm trying to think, it's on an hourly rate. It's not a salaried until you hit the RM or the researcher role. When you're assistant and associate, it's an hourly rate. But you still receive all the same benefits and time off and things like that. But I do get that question a lot of kind of, can you actually make a living doing genealogy? And yes, you can. It's awesome.
So good to hear. So good to hear. This conversation has just been so amazing, and we're so grateful for the questions that came in from the students, because these are the things that, they ask every person who works in this field, all these questions, because it's just so important as they're moving forward to know what's available and what they're already doing to be qualified. Just a good reminder of what they're already doing to be qualified. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. We're going to sign off. We hope you have a wonderful day. Join us on April 1st for our next webinar. Thanks again, Virginia.
Thank you.